welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping bits before we continue. If you have any specific questions about your development, we won't be able to discuss them at this webinar for GDPR reasons, but if you do have specific queries, feel free to get in touch with us after the webinar. If you have any questions, as Jemima said, just use the Q&A function and we'll try and pick up as many of those as we can at the end of the call. And we will be sharing a copy of this webinar, both the recording and the transcription, with anyone that wasn't able to make it. So yeah, welcome everyone again. Today we'll be covering the Building Safety Act 2022 for high-rise buildings. It's a fairly complex topic and there's a lot of nuances to it and there's a lot of detail that we could share, but that will take most of the evening to do. So we've tried to focus on covering the high level bits to make sure that you have a full understanding of what the regulation is, what the process is, and what kind of instruction we need from you as directors of these high-rise buildings. And of course, the obligations that you have as directors. So the agenda, we'll try and get through it as quickly as we can. There's a few slides to get through, but we'd like to provide as much time as possible at the end for the Q&A. So we'll do some welcome introductions. I will cover off the roles in building safety so you understand the different roles that feed into this process. And then Shauna from ARK Workplace Risk will cover the building safety cases and the building safety regulator, along with the golden thread and MORS. And then to finish off, my colleague Jemima will cover the resident profile and engagement strategy, which you no doubt have had some paperwork from her on. And then we'll do the Q&A bit at the end. So I can make this work. So some introductions quickly. So my name is John Yanduka. I am the Operations Director at Jennings Barrett. On the call, we have Jemima Hurd, who is the Marketing and Communications Manager from Jennings Barrett. And we also have Shauna Thornton, who's the Director of Growth and Customer Service at ARK Workplace Risk. They are essentially the specialists that are assisting us with a lot of the fire risk assessments, fire door assessments, all the elements that would typically go into a building safety case, whilst also preparing the drafts for the building safety case that eventually go to the building safety regulator. So for anyone that is not aware, if there's anyone external that's joined, we're Jennings Barrett. We're a block and estate management provider, and we've been in the business for the past 115 years. We're a family-owned business, independent, and we provide resident managed companies, freeholders, and landlords across the southeast of England with property management services. I'm sure Shauna will get into this, but a brief intro to ARK Workplace Risk. So they essentially, as I said, cover a lot of the assessments that go into the back end of what we do as managing agents to ensure the safety and security of the residents and leaseholders on site. So the predominant purpose of this webinar is, as I said at the start, to go through the significant changes that have happened in the industry around building safety, especially the Building Safety Act and the introduction of the Building Safety Regulator. So whilst us as Jennings Barrett and ARK, we can advise and support on compliance generally, we can only be responsible for the instructions that we are eventually given from the directors of the company, oftentimes who act as the principal accountable person. And I'll get into more of what each role represents and what the obligations of each role are. So this is really the key focus, is what are the roles in building safety? And they're four predominant categories. So you have the principal accountable person, you have the accountable person, the responsible person, and the competent person. Now, all of these roles are responsible for the fire safety of a development. So the principal accountable person is, it could be a freeholder, it could be a MC, so a resident management company, many of which you are directors of, where essentially you control the structure and the exterior of the building. There can only be one single point of contact for the building safety regulator, and that is the PAP. And you would essentially be responsible for the building structure. Now, under the principal accountable person, there are accountable people, and this entity are people who own a legal duty to maintain the communal areas of the building. So again, this could be the freeholder, this could be the residence management company, it could be an RTM company, head lessee, or any party in the lease with repairing obligations. It's very important to advise at this point that this is all dependent on what your lease structure is. So the first step is always to understand what the lease structure is, because that will then tell you what responsibility you have under the legislation. And then thirdly, there's the responsible person. So this is anyone with control of a premises or responsibilities towards fire safety. So Jennings and Barrett falls squarely into this category as managing agents. It could be commercial tenants if you have commercial units at your developments, landlord, or anyone in control of the premises. And last but not least is a competent person. This is essentially all of the services that we, as responsible people, accountable people, and principal accountable people, rely upon to undertake the duties that we've instructed them to do. So whether that's a fire risk assessor like Workplace, ARK Workplace, engineers, contractors, consultants, anyone on site essentially that have been instructed, particularly around fire safety, they have responsibility as a competent person. So this is an important bit of the puzzle, is how do the, oh, sorry, I went one too far. How do these roles interconnect? So the principal accountable person, better known as PAP, is the strategic lead. So the PAP sits at the top of the pyramid for building safety in terms of structure and coordinates the whole building compliance. So they have a complete overview and the primary contact for the building safety regulator. The accountable person or people, because there could be more than one, they're linked more to the ownership, the leases, and the repairing responsibilities under the lease. So they only manage the risk in the parts they control. So if you have a freeholder and the RMC is not responsible for the structure of the building, they're only responsible for the communal area management, that's the only bit that would fall under their responsibility, and they would be considered an AP rather than a PAP. An RP, so a responsible person, focuses on the fire safety compliance, systems, procedures, evacuations. So essentially what we do as managing agents. You as clients would advise us, instruct us to undertake those duties on your behalf, and that then becomes our responsibility to deliver that. So whether that's fire risk assessments, whether that's fire door assessments, sharing evacuation information with the residents, all of that would fall under a responsible person responsibility once they've been instructed by the PAP or the AP. And lastly is the competent person. And the competent persons are, again, instructed by the PAP, the AP, and also us as responsible people to essentially undertake the work. So as the RMC, you would instruct us to do the fire risk assessment. In turn, we would advise our workplace solutions to then do that on your behalf. So that's the chain of responsibility. Now, in practice, one organization, so one RMC may hold several roles simultaneously. So you could be the accountable person, possibly the principal accountable person, and obviously appoint a managing agent who then acts operationally as responsible person support, which would be us as Jennings Barrett. We have quite a few of these slides, and I'm conscious of the limited time that we have, and we'll obviously share all this information. I wanted to cover the kind of the main criteria of what falls within each of the responsibilities. So I will very quickly go through what the PAP, the AP, and the responsible person responsibilities are generally, but I won't go into too much detail. So each building, each development needs to have one clearly identifiable responsible person known as the PAP. Now, the responsibilities are to register the building with the BSR and maintain the information kept on the register accurately. So any developments under our care would have been registered with the BSR when it became a legal requirement in October 2023. And we would have also included the key building information at that stage. The PAP is responsible to manage the structure and fire risk safety, prepare then keep the building safety case report, which is part of the bits that Shauna is going to go through with you today. So you have a better understanding of the makeup of the building safety case and what is included in it and the various complexities. Also to create and operate following systems, so mandatory occurrence reporting systems, complaint system, and resident engagement strategy. All of these feed into the building safety case report so that when the building safety regulator requests for a development to apply for a building assessment certificate, all of that information is ready there to be reviewed and hopefully cover each element. And the way that we do that is by undertaking an extensive gap analysis beforehand to make sure that we have all the information that is required. So responsible person responsibilities. So whilst they don't have the same responsibilities as a PAP, they are still significant. So they're still responsible for assessing and managing the risks posed to and around the development, from structural failure to spread of fire. And the way that they must do this is to report safety occurrences to the BSR and report them on the mandatory occurrence reporting system operated by the PAP, carry out the general duties related to the resident engagement strategy, which is one of the pieces that Jennings and Barrett assist with, and which Jemima will cover at the back end of the webinar. Key information about the building, also known as the golden thread of information, which is the bit that Shauna will go through, and provide building information to relevant individuals and organizations. Now, there are quite a few slides for responsible person, and the reason why there's so much here is because there's more nuances to the responsible person, because there's so many different elements that go into the building safety case and that need to be instructed. So I won't go through all of this, but essentially the responsible person would be Jennings and Barrett, instructed by our RMC clients or a freeholder. And we would essentially document and record everything health and safety and keep that in a manner which can then be shared with both ARK Workplace and the Building Safety Regulator to allow for the building safety case to be built. So very quickly, some consequences of failing to fulfill responsibilities. Now, when the BSR was introduced and the legislation came into place, there was a lot of confusion, mostly created by the BSR. And I think that the level of information and clarity was not as good as it should have been. But there's been sufficient time for people to now understand the responsibilities and put the right measures in place to ensure that whatever the requirements are, they can be met. Firstly, when the building gets called by the BSR, but more importantly, for the PAP to ensure that the building is safe for its residents. That is the primary requirement under the legislation. Being called by the BSR, that's essentially the audit bit. But you need to ensure that all of the responsibilities are being fulfilled now and not wait necessarily until the building gets called. That is not the purpose of the legislation. So accountable persons, principal accountable persons, and responsible persons need to ensure that their responsibilities in regards to the safety of the premises and residents are fulfilled. So the consequences for failing to do is non-statutory notifications of deficiencies, statutory notice requiring remedial action, alteration notices, prohibition notices, or just simple or formal caution. They can have with them significant financial penalties and prosecution where negligence leads to serious injury or death, which we certainly hope will not happen in future. And enforcement should always be proportionate to the circumstances that have prompted the authority's action to begin with. To be fair, we have found that they're very pragmatic, even where there is areas of improvement. They've been far more pragmatic than they have been in the past and far more willing to help. So that approach is certainly winning people around to the BSR and the kind of general concept of what it's trying to achieve. And lastly, a competent person. So a competent person is anyone who has sufficient training, experience, and knowledge to allow them to implement firefighting and detection measures, such as non-automatic firefighting equipment, and anyone that arranges any necessary contacts with external emergency services, particularly firefighting, rescue work, first aid, and emergency medical care. Think of that have been trained to deliver some of these services. And last but not least, common mistakes to avoid. It's more misconceptions than mistakes. Assuming the managing agent or any other agency outside of the PAP automatically holds a legal duty. That will always sit with the PAP. Whilst the PAP can essentially ask externally or instruct externally for items to be carried out, the legal responsibility will always sit with the PAP. Another common mistake that we find is assuming contractors transfer liability, which they don't, failing to document who controls what from the PAP to the AEP to the responsible person and then competent person, and generally treating fire safety separately from the wider structural safety. They are one and the same, And as going through some of the building safety cases, the BSR has made it very clear that the structural safety and the fire safety are essentially hand in hand to provide a complete overview of the fire safety of the development. I think that is all I wanted to cover, so I will pass over to Shauna.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you to Joni and Jemima for welcoming me along today. My name is Shauna. As Joni said, I work for a company called ARK Workplace Risk, and we are competent persons that support our clients to try and understand the complexities associated with the building assessment certificate. So I'm going to kind of take you through a very high-level overview of the Building Safety Act. I'm sure there will be questions coming from today's webinar that we are happy to do a follow-up or answer any questions along with Jemima and Joni and following on from this. But to give you a little bit of an understanding as to where things have started, obviously since October 2023, it is a legal requirement for buildings that currently fall into scopes, that's buildings that are over 18 metres or 7 floors or above, to have a safety case report in place or to apply for your building assessment certificate when called by the building safety regulator. One of the things that we have found is that the building assessment applications are not a one-off event. And what we mean by that is that there is continuous compliance associated with completing your safety case reports. And I remember at the very beginning when we were looking at completing a safety case report, resident engagement strategies, and trying to understand what the building safety regulator or the HSE at the time were looking for, it was found that people were expecting this to be a one-off event or a one-off fee that actually might occur. And what we are finding now is actually this is continuous. There is not just one document that you have to complete. There is also a suite of your safety case, or what's known as your golden thread, which is additional documentation that you have to complete to ensure that your building is safe. So one of the reasons why you have to apply to the building safety regulator if called forward is to satisfy section 83 of the Building Safety Act. And that is the duty of the PAP, and Joni very much covered what the difference is between a principal accountable person and an accountable person. But one of the things that you must do is to assess building safety risks. And one of the misconceptions that has occurred within the industry is that to apply for a building assessment application or to complete a safety case report, people think that you're satisfying the building safety regulator, when actually the Building Safety Act very clearly states that the PAP must assess building safety risk, which is your fire and your structure, to ensure that the building is safe for continued occupation. So really the PAP should be completing these documents to satisfy themselves, not to satisfy the building safety regulator. It's ongoing, and Joni is right, over the last 24 months it has been incredibly complex trying to understand exactly what the building safety regulator is looking for. I think very unhelpfully, probably 14 months after everybody started the kind of procedures and applying for their building assessment certificate, the building safety regulator around December 24 released a criteria in which they outlined what exactly they were looking for when you were asked to apply for your building assessment certificate. So very interestingly, since October 23, over 80% of the building assessment certificates that have been asked to apply to the regulator have failed. And that is a really high figure, and probably higher than the building safety regulator was expecting. And what they have found is that the quality of the applications have varied, and there has been very limited information. But I think what the BSR has probably not recognised is what I've mentioned just a few moments ago. The criteria that they released arrived in December 24. There was a lot of confusion and misconceptions within the industry. And actually, still to this day, what we are finding is that the building safety regulatory leads, who are the people that will process the applications, have very different interpretations of the criteria. So depending on what part of the country you're located within, but depending on what type of BSR lead you're dealing with, they will be looking for different pieces of information and documentation. So we're hoping over the next coming months there will be a lot clearer kind of understanding, but we do know at the moment that there is certain things that you have to have in place, and there is certain documentation that you have to have in place when you are asked to apply for your building assessment cert. So we'll get into that because that's the most important thing. So If you are called forward by the Building Safety Regulator, the PAP will be asked to apply for your building assessment cert. So you have to pay an initial fee of £302. You have to supply a copy of the safety case report. And in a few moments' time, I'll go into a little bit more detail about what's contained within that safety case report. You have to apply and supply a copy of your resident engagement strategy, which Jemima will cover in a lot more detail of how that actually works. And you also have to provide information on your mandatory occurrence reporting system. So again, I'll cover that off in a few moments' time. You also have to supply something which is called your key building information. And this would have been what you were asked to supply right back at the start of your registration. One thing to be aware of, which is something the BSR are not very forthcoming in talking about, is the fee that actually you will have to pay at the end of this process in order to obtain your building assessment certificate. So at the moment, the fee to review your building assessment certificate, which is different from the initial fee, has increased in the last few months from £144 to £152 per hour. And on average, what we are finding that each individual application is roughly costing between £17,000 to £22,000. So incredibly high, and exactly the opposite of what the BSR initially had stated that it would be. So something to keep in mind, that these are costs that you may not be expecting that have to be paid to the regulator in order to achieve your building assessment certificate. So what is a safety case report? So a safety case report, in essence, is a narrative of your safety case, and your safety case can be also called your golden thread. And really, it's a whole building understanding from your Regulation 38 documentation to your handover documentation to your structural information, your building control information, right through to the continued operation and management of the building. So really what it's trying to review and assess is the life cycle of your HRB or your high-rise building. And it forms a part of what's known as your building assessment certificate application. It's an incredibly important document. And once you are called forward by the regulator, you have 28 days in which to submit your safety case report. It's an incredibly complex document. And on the next slide, I'll go through some of the documents that are additional to your safety case report that have to be also submitted as part of your application further down the line once your application certificate process has started. Now, your safety case report, if you think about your fire risk assessment, which is your snapshot in time, it's your legal document reviewing the fire safety within your building. A safety case report is similar, but it's assessing building safety risk. So it covers two parts at the moment, which is your structural risk assessments and your structure, and also your fire. So it's looking at the spread of fire, it's looking at the compartmentation, the fire doors, all of the elements that make up fire safety within your building. There is a part C also within section 83 of the assessing building safety risk, which is called prescribed matters. At the moment, we are uncertain what that will look like, but they are thinking that they will broaden the scope for your safety case report to include the likes of your asbestos and Legionella information, not in the next 6 to 12 months, but expected in the next 2 to 3 years. So something to bear in mind. That information does currently form part of your golden thread and your safety case information, but it just shows the scope in which the building safety regulator can expand and broaden the process of their safety case report application as and when required. So a little bit of an understanding, obviously, and more depth as to what you have to supply as part of your safety case report. So it's very important that the people producing your safety case report are competent. I think that's something that a lot of people have fall short of over the last sort of 18 to 24 months, where actually the people creating the safety case report have to have an understanding of not just fire, but structure. That is really important. So some of the key areas that have to be supplied and included within your safety case report is obviously your key building information and description of the building. Is it connected to car parks? Does it have maybe a commercial unit or a retail unit on the bottom half? Or is it a mixed building? Is there other accountable persons within that particular HRB? So we really have to understand not only the building descriptions, but the relationship between the PAP, the accountable persons, and the responsible persons that Jonian covered on a few slides before. We really have to align and outline that within the safety case report. We do need to understand the design, the construction, and the materials that were used, not only at the very beginning of the design intent, but now is what is as built within that particular building as well. So you might have design strategies. We need to ensure that the as built and what's happening within your building is as of today, that it is suitable and sufficient, and it matches the design intent. So you have to look at the structure. So one of the things that a lot of people have not realized over the last number of kind of months is you have to have what's known as a structural risk assessment completed, and it is a legal requirement for a HRB to have a structural risk assessment completed in order to achieve and get a building assessment certificate. Without it, you are probably highly unlikely to obtain a building assessment cert. So a critical part of your safety case report and a critical part of your building assessment application. We need to look at fire safety, and this is everything fire safety, from your fire risk assessments to your fire doors, compartmentation, all of the information surrounding your active and your passive systems within your building. And we also need to consider what are the actions and the remediation that might be taking place. So to give you an example, if you've had a fire risk assessment completed and you supply an update on a copy of that as part of your building assessment application, you do have to outline the progress that have been identified as part of that fire risk assessment. And what I mean by that is any actions that have been identified off the back of your fire risk assessment, you have to be showing progress as part of your safety case application. So you can't just provide them with a copy of a fire risk assessment with no update to any of the actions that have been identified. We have to have a clear program, a clear action plan in place, and a clear deadline as to when those actions are going to be completed. Without the proper understanding of the management of risks, again, you could be at risk of failing your building assessment certificate. And that is why it's so important to be working with the likes of Joni and the team to ensure that actually that information is gathered and it forms part of your application process. We also have to look at your emergency plans. There's also an element of what's known as a safety management system, and this is like a building safety management system. Again, it's an important part of your application process, and it looks at all the day-to-day PPM management for that building. You will need that again in order to achieve your building assessment certificate. Once you have applied for your building assessment certificate, as I said, you have 28 days in which to submit your safety case report once you have been called forward by the BSR. Typically at the moment, it's around 6 months. It can be longer depending on your application, but roughly around 6 months later, the BSR or the Building Safety Regulatory Lead will get in contact with you, and they will ask you and probably your responsible person like Joni to get in touch, and they will ask you to provide additional documents known as RFI or request for further information. And this is where they will ask you to supply all of the additional documents that form part of your golden thread. Any documents that formed part of that safety case report, your resident engagement strategy, and obviously your mandatory occurrence reporting now have to be loaded into the BSR's online portal. You have 7 days only in which to submit those documents, and following on from that, they will then decide if they are going to provide you with the building assessment certificate, which should last for 5 years and can be displayed within the reception of your building. Or you may face what's known as a prompt remedy notice, where they're undecided on the journey in which is going to happen, or you may have a rejection. If you have a rejection, you will then be served with something like a compliance notice that Jonian has touched on, in which you have a number of months in which to complete any of the items that they have identified within that compliance notice. At the moment, it's typically around 6 months in which to complete that. Another element that you will have to discuss at this stage is your mandatory occurrence reporting. Think of your mandatory occurrence reporting as a bit like RIDOR for accident reporting, but this is reporting your building safety risks. APs, PAPs, and also residents can report mandatory occurrences. So really important that you are aware of the procedures and which to follow and how they can be raised within your buildings. As I mentioned, the refusal, approval, and actions to take. So typically, if you do have a refusal, you have typically around 6 months in which to complete that compliance notice. Frustratingly at the moment, if you do complete all of the items within that contravention letter or compliance notice within the 6 months, you may have to wait a further 2 years in which you can reapply for your building assessment certificate. And that is just based on the demand that the BSR is currently facing. Those lead times may come down, but because they are quite delayed in getting through the first tranche of buildings to actually apply for their certificates, the lead time for reapplication is around 2 years. So advice to you is get it right the first time. As I mentioned, the fee for the regulator is incredibly high at the moment. It's £152 per hour in which to review your application. So getting it right at the beginning, getting it right before you are asked to apply for your building assessment certificate is incredibly important. It will reduce the fees from the regulator further down the line. So what you should be doing now, very quickly before I hand over to Jemima, I can see she's come off mute, getting ready to go. So develop your safety case report. Don't wait to be called. What I will tell you from experience for clients that have waited, it is incredibly difficult to write a complex document like a safety case report within 28 days because of the elements that I've just touched on. It covers structure, it covers fire. There might be additional documents that you need to complete that may not already exist within your building, like a structural risk assessment, a fire strategy, whatever that might be. So don't wait. Gather those necessary documents now, form part of your safety case report, have it in draft, and then when you are called forward by the regulator, you can actually submit those 3 documents within 28 days. So I've covered everything. Jemima, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shauna. Sorry, I do have in big letters on my notes the word unmute because I really felt like I would forget that bit. Before I go into resident engagement, and I'll try to spin through it really quick, I'm just going to introduce personal emergency evacuation plans because I refer to those quite a bit. The acronym for that is PEEPS, and that refers to people who identify as disabled in your building, the process of making sure in the case of an emergency evacuation, they are able to get out of the building to a safe place and how that occurs, and also ensures that they're able to understand any fire, evacuation or building safety information provided. So whilst we call this a resident engagement platform, and this is what clients of Jennings and Barrett will get upon instructing us to do, actually this is the front door to your Building Safety Act compliance in regards to the visibility that residents have over it. So where your safety case is authority facing, this platform is really your resident facing side. It combines the safety information you need to provide to residents along with systems that enable you to get the safety information that you deliver this as a website that people can also save to their phones as a web app. Using this method means that people are able to enlarge text, they can use it with screen readers, and it's an affordable way to add in new languages if we need to for a minimal cost. It will be bespoke to your development, so the URL will be unique, it will match your development, it'll be easy to find. QR codes printed within your development will make this really easy for your residents to use. And essentially it's there all in one place. It ensures that it's not just leaseholders who get all your information, it enables guests to find it, tenants to find it, for us to understand who those people are and also how they're using the system. So to speed up, because I'm sure we all want to get through the Q&A. So the next steps, if we're not already working on your building safety case, which I'm sure most of the people here are engaged in that process, we need to understand what it is that you want from Jennings and Barrett when it comes to your personal emergency evacuation planning process, your mandatory occurrence reporting process, your safety concerns and safety complaints reporting process, also how you intend to consult with residents, engage with residents, and what options you're going to have within that. We will be sending around this presentation and we have built a lot of resources around it to help you. So I've linked one in the Q&A already. That's our director's guide, which you can see on my screen now. goes into more detail about what each role is. So if you're not sure, you can go back through. We've also created a resource that, again, you'll be able to get through these slides, where you have a Word document to go through as a board, and it will ask you exactly what role do you want when it comes to mandatory occurrence reporting strategies? Do you want to be part of the notification process when it begins, or do you want to just be notified once we've completed our investigation and determined whether or not it is an occurrence or it's not a reportable occurrence, and so on. Once you have agreed that as a board, we make it really easy for you to tell us what you want us to do via a form, and that creates a record that we can go back to, that you can refer back to, and also that we can compare to your lease to make sure that what you're asking for is actually viable. And we'll talk to your property managers about what parts of that are already occurring and what parts we maybe need some extra support on to go through with that. Once we have that agreed with your property managers, we'll go back to you, tell you what the operations team at Jennings and Barrett suggest. In the meantime, we start getting on with ensuring you're getting your resident profiles out. So we're asking your residents who's in the building, which of those might have mobility issues or access issues or communication issues. We're starting that scoping process, putting them in touch with resources such as the fire brigade where they need to be. And we're starting to build all of the automated notification systems that go behind the back of your building safety case, your MORS, your concerns reporting, and so on. We will aim to launch a resident platform within 3 weeks of starting the resident profile survey campaigns. However, if we receive a lot of instructions at once, it will slow it down, but we will try to be as proactive as possible when it comes to that. Yes, hopefully that was enough of an oversight without going into too much detail about any one thing. And Jane, did I miss anything off there?
You didn't. No, the only thing I would add is that we've put a lot of resource, Jemima predominantly, to get all of this information in one place and make it easily accessible for our directors, because we appreciate that it's a very complex topic. We've spoken about it for 45 minutes, but we could probably do another 5 hours and still not cover everything. So we've tried to make that journey as easy as possible. All that we ask is that you engage with us proactively. All the information has been produced in a very easily digestible way. And the way in which you give instruction should be essentially what we're trying to do is make sure that you as the PAP or the AP, in instructing us as the responsible person, there's a very clear trail there of what is required, what we're delivering. And that also, it doesn't take the responsibility off you as the PAP, but it shows a very clear instruction to your responsible person to then deliver it. And that's the reason why we've built it in this manner, to make it easy for you to understand which bits you're instructing on and what that entails in terms of the instruction, and what we'll produce in turn following that instruction. Now, we've neatly somehow made it in 45 minutes. So we're at the Q&A. I've had a look at the Q&A section. There aren't any questions on there. I don't know if we can do a raised hand thing, Jemima, for 15 minutes.
My question at the start was just about where the slides are going to be available after. So I wanted to know before I started taking copious notes whether you're going to provide them.
Oh yeah, you probably joined a couple of minutes after, but yes, we will be sharing all of the slides and the transcript following this. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. Do you think this could have an impact? So if you fail, which it seems quite likely that one will, is there likely to be an impact on the ability to sell properties? So will purchasers be saying, I need to see a copy of your whatever, or lenders even, because that's what happened with, we still get some lenders asking for copies of our cladding report, even though we don't have any cladding, and they just won't lend without it. Is that going to be the similar thing here, that unless you've got a building safety case report that's passed, that lenders or vendors or purchasers won't buy the properties?
Potentially. I think you're in a great thing with Johnny and Jemima and the team to actually pass, because I think we've been working and doing this process for a long time now. So I think all of us are very clear on what's required in order to obtain your building assessment certificate. But your words are correct in so much as early as November 23, we already saw within due diligence packs that can somebody provide a building assessment certificate as part of the sales process, which is impossible, because if your building has not been called forward by the regulator, then you just won't have a building assessment cert. But it is something absolutely that we already see when buildings are exchanging hands. The questions are being asked: do you have a safety case report? In some cases they may ask for a building assessment certificate, but you absolutely, that is a key document along with the resident engagement strategy for sure. I think it's important to note, and what can happen sometimes is, if people think that the building has been rejected, it means that automatically the building is unsafe. That's not correct. You might have a failure just over a simple document like a structural risk assessment, because the way in which the BSR are assessing the building safety risk, it's like a criteria, as I mentioned. So the building may be still safe, it just hasn't obtained the BAC or the building assessment cert. But you're right, yes, we already are starting to see that as part of a due diligence piece.
I think one of the other issues around that is not necessarily, we see a lot in the sales side of Jennings and Barrett, where mortgage providers are asking buildings that wouldn't ever need an EWS1 form for an EWS1 form. So yes, I would imagine that you get...
You're right. Yeah, there's been often easy on those buildings, but the important thing to know is that it's lender preference, right? It's not a legal requirement for an EWS1 to be made available. It makes leaseholders' lives very difficult, which in turn makes the directors' lives very difficult. So we appreciate the kind of issue it causes, but ultimately it's more of a lender decision rather than a legislative requirement. Although the FRAW, which is the document that is used to prepare the EWS1, feeds into the whole building safety and building safety case report, so it's not a wasted.
My follow-up question, really, just I'll shut up, is between your J&B and ARK, you mentioned the high failure rate. Do you have a success? So have you had some that have succeeded and they've got a track, so you know what it is that's required?
Yes, we've had 30 applications that we've managed to achieve building assessment certs. I know you're probably thinking that seems quite low, but based on the amount of rejections, it's actually pretty high.
So it's 30 out of how many? If you did 1,000, it's probably not very good, but if you did 35.
It's because the rejection has been so high. A lot of people failed because they did not have structural risk assessments in place. That is where a lot of the rejections initially early on had come from. We were quite lucky in ARK that we knew that structure was always going to be an important element of it, and it was something that we were highlighting very early on to our clients, that structure was going to form part of it. And without a structural risk assessment, you just will not achieve a building assessment cert. So those very early on applications, without it, suffered the consequences of that.
Okay, so as I won't make it too specific, but just as a general point, because it affects buildings in this area, our building is a 19th century converted warehouse. So we don't have as-built drawings of when it was constructed. So my worry is, how can we satisfy the structural assessment without, nobody's got any drawings about what goes into the ground or anything else. So it's do you think that's surmountable though? Because we're not a new build, we're not a Grenfell new build tower block that's been built badly. We're a 200-year-old converted warehouse.
Yeah, proportionality forms part of it. Is important to remember. They will look at the age of the building, the type of building, the criteria, but you will have to obviously get that initial assessment done. But they will also consider the age, the proportionality. That's all taken into the application process too.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Right,
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We were built in about 2000. There were some building irregularities from the start and defects that we noticed when we were doing some fairly major works to the ground floor of the building. We're now waiting to do and to get an independent third party to assess what needs to be done. So if we were to get on with this strategy properly at this point, we would probably find ourselves doing it all over again. It seemed to me a bit of a pointless exercise. So I got in touch with the building safety regulator and made a case for delaying the process. And they wrote back formally to say, delay the work, do what they need to do first of all. And now this is dragging on a bit. And Jennings and Barrett, as our managing agent, are pressing on with it, because we know that we mustn't just pay lip service to safety stuff. We need to be getting on with it. But we are subject to the delays that are there as a result of Barclays' slowness to act. I can see that there are things that we can be doing to gather in readiness for all of this. It would seem to me that we're safe to just give it a little bit longer and see what happens. Do you agree? There's little more that we can do at this point.
I don't know Shauna's input on this, but I think from my perspective, if the BSR has specifically put in writing that they are happy for you to delay that process, we need to essentially rely on that, not too strongly, because I have found that the BSR tends to change its mind without telling you very well. So I think if sufficient time passes, we'll probably need to reconfirm that with them. However, there's so many elements that go into the building safety case that we can complete other elements that feed into it that won't have any impact on what you need on site. And once they've completed what they've done and they fill in that missing piece, hopefully we have everything around it that is ready to then go into the building safety case. But correct me if I'm wrong, Shauna.
No, I would agree with that. I would agree with Johnny, and to not leave it too long and probably reconfirm, as I would agree that the BSR can change their mind quite quickly, and a time frame previously that they were happy with may no longer be the case. It re-engage, get them to reconfirm in writing and get the other works done.
That we need to specify 11 apartments that they can visit as part of the surveying exercise as a random sample. And so I think they may be poised to come in and do their work now. So maybe it's not too far off. But we have the local authority who are on our side with all of this. So they've said that if this were ever to go to court, they would stand alongside us in the process. One more question. May I ask about the PAP role? If we were keen to have, because it seems to me that whatever anybody says, it pays to be an expert in these things, and not to be an expert and to have that burden of responsibility is pretty weighty. Is it possible to engage Jennings and Barrett as the PAP?
I'm afraid not. One of the key things that the building safety regulator and the legislation makes very clear is that the responsibility of the PAP cannot be passed on. You can instruct for works to be done, such as to us as the responsible person, but the ultimate responsibility as the PAP cannot be transferred.
No, I understand that we would have the ultimate responsibility, and if something went wrong, that would be for us to have a governance role in that exercise. So could it be our management board, our board of directors, has that responsibility, but that charges you with the expert role in discharging that responsibility?
Yeah, so we already act as a responsible person within this whole framework, right? So we have our own responsibility because as the board, we have a contract and you have instructed us to be your managing agents. And the reason why Jemima has laid out all of the instruction piece for all of these elements, it is not just to provide the detail, but it's to provide the clarity to both you as a client and us as the responsible person on what we are delivering. So essentially through that document is how you discharge those duties onto us for us to undertake them on your behalf.
And so that defines what level of involvement you want when it comes to things like your mandatory occurrence reporting process. Do you want to know as soon as someone raises a safety concern, do you want to be part of that automated notification process? Do you want to be part of the investigation, or do you want to wait until we've scoped it out, identified whether or not it fits in the mandatory occurrence or whether it doesn't? We do ask you that, and that's why the form is so long, because we make you go into detail to make sure that you fully understand what you're asking us to do, but also we clearly have it documented what we should be doing for you. I do just want to say back, however, the legislation around personal emergency evacuation plans did change in April. So not only do high-rise buildings have to do that now, but also 11 plus meter buildings that have simultaneous evacuation. There is nothing stopping you going out and asking your residents if any of them need support to understand fire safety information or to evacuate the building. We can roll that out really fast, and then you are covered should anything happen because you're in that process already. So even if the BSR have told you to delay, and even if they continue on with that advice, I would say we should still go forward with the resident profiles in the block.
So at our next board meeting, Jonian, you could steer us through that initial process, couldn't you?
Of course. Yeah, I'll do my best.
Thank you.
No worries.
Yeah, about resident engagement. So we have our leaseholders, freehold. Our leaseholders have a share of freehold, and then a lot of them sublet to tenants. I keep getting a bit confused about what our obligations or how we should engage with those tenants, because we don't know who they are. We can ask the leaseholders and they may or may not tell us who they are. They may change fairly regularly. We don't know what their needs are, and we don't have a means of communicating with them. So if we have the whatever strategy we have, how do we tell tenants who we have no means of contacting apart from mail drops all the time? So that's the resident engagement strategy when lots of our residents are people we have no knowledge or awareness of, is one of our challenges, I think.
So that's really easy to solve. We put QR codes on your notice boards. We put posts through the door. If we need to, we send our team knocking on the door. We talk to your on-site staff. We get them knocking on doors we don't know once a week. However, as part of this service, we do say there's a certain amount of resource behind every set of instructions that you provide us, and ask you to define how you want to use that resource. So if you want us to be doing the post, knocking on doors for landlords in your block, which is understandable, and I think that's best practice, and that's what I'd always advocate, safety first, we can do that. However, you might not think that leaseholders who've lent out their property should be able to opt out of that system really easily, and they should be the ones to do the resource. We make it very clear in that situation that they are the accountable person, responsible persons for their units. They have a responsibility to comply when it comes to their tenants. Tenants have a residential responsibility to comply with building safety as well. But the good news of having a marketing person in the ops team is that we know how to shout really loudly when we need to. So we just need the permission in order to do it.
And the QR code you're talking about, a QR code, when they click on the QR code, they access what? The portal?
So no, they would get to their engagement platforms. So that's here, and this can be saved to phones as a web app. It can be favorited. Nothing here is only for leaseholders. It is entirely resident facing.
So as long as we've given them access to that, whether they do or don't bother is not our problem.
Absolutely. We only have to do what is reasonable. And because we've put so much work into building this system, we can show absolutely every single attempt that we have made digitally to get that information. We can log calls that we've tried to make to the leaseholder and things like that. We are covered when it comes to proving that we've done the reasonable, and we would love to be the people who are able to go above and beyond and knocking on doors and engaging the on-site staff and identifying.
But presumably we can't give that information. We can't do the mail drop or give them the QR codes until we've got the thing you're showing now completed. So we can't implement our strategy until we've actually created the.
No, we can. So what we do is create a URL for you, and then that URL hosts the campaign, and then once your platform's ready, it changes over to host your platform, and then when it comes back around to doing your campaign, it all sits within that platform.
Yeah, so just all of this element that you see, which is essentially the finished product of a platform for your development, that does not need to be in situ for us to start collecting information through the code that Jemima is saying, because that sits on a separate system which then feeds into the overall website. And we use that information to create a lot of the detail that goes into the resident engagement. So we need that information regardless.
So sorry, maybe I'm being dumb. Is the mail drops and the QR codes, is that to give them information or for them to give us information?
For them to give
Both.
us information, but it works both ways, because we can decide what information goes on there, but it's essentially a means for them to very quickly access the digital bit to provide all the details we need that then feeds into the resident engagement strategy.
Okay, so you sent us a draft letter a long time ago, which I edited and sent back to you, Jemima, which probably need to dig out again now. If we got that mail drop through everybody's door,
Yeah.
we need to look at what it says. Then they should go on to that port. Then it should tell them to go onto the portal and upload all their necessary information.
Yes.
It needs to give them a rationale as to why they need to do it.
So what would be a good thing to have before we do that is an understanding of what you would like in terms of the engagement strategy for them to consult on, because part of your resident engagement strategy involves a consultation. So rather than going out and asking them for their information and then going out and asking them how they want to hear from you and how they want to engage, you may as well put it all into one survey they can do in 3 minutes.
Yeah, so I think essentially what Jemima is saying is, once we have that clear instruction of which elements you would like for us to do, the implementation bit, because there's been so much work that's gone into the back end process that you see as a finished product, that a lot of that work has already been done. So once the instruction is in place, we can move very quickly to implement all the stuff that Jemima was talking about.
Okay, all right. And I hope it's not really much worth saying. Hopefully the government or regulators realise this is costing all of us mortals a huge amount of money, and we're taking on a huge amount of risk. For we're all. I thought we're supposed to be getting rid of regulation, not increasing it. But anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway.
We share your frustration. It has been.
You still get paid for doing it.
You say
I
that,
think that's
Roger.
not true.
Oh, maybe not.
We'll
Maybe
probably
not.
get into a different conversation on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. If no one else has any questions, thank you all for joining us today. As we said at the beginning, we'll share a copy of the transcript and the video. Thank you to Shauna for joining us from ARK Workplace. And thank you again all for coming, and hopefully speak soon. Thank you all.
Much appreciated. Thanks very much. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Oh, we've got one more.
Yeah, just to say thank you.
Oh, no worries.
Oh,
Thank you.
no,
I
no.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Very
Have a
clear.
good evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Brilliant.